Okay, so let's talk about Greenland. It's this vast, icy island with a tiny population and an economy that's almost completely propped up by Denmark. It's a place of really fascinating contradictions, and lately it's found itself right in the middle of some intense global attention. So what's the deal here? Let's get into it.
And this really is the central mystery, isn't it? We're talking about an economy that, if we're being honest, would have a hard time even existing without all the funding it gets from the outside. So why on earth are global superpowers suddenly paying so much attention? In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what makes this remote island so incredibly important.
All right, first things first. To really get why everyone's so interested, we have to wrap our heads around what Greenland actually is. And economically, it's a total paradox. Let's just start with the sheer scale of the place. Greenland is home to only 57,000 people. I mean, think about that. That's less than you'd find at a big football game, and they're spread out across the world's largest island.
And as you might guess, its economy is just as small. We're talking about a total economic output of just $3.3 billion. To put that in perspective, there are single zip codes in the United States that generate more economic activity than that. It's kind of wild.
So here's the bottom line. If you just look at the numbers, Greenland's economy looks a lot like a small, remote village. It's got a tiny population, a tiny GDP, and it's super reliant on one main thing: fishing. And most importantly, a ton of financial support from Denmark.
And you can really see this dependency when you look at where people work. Get this, almost half of the entire workforce is in government administration. Now, for a place this small and simple, that kind of public sector employment just, well, it doesn't happen on its own. It's only possible because Denmark is footing the bill.
In fact, the source material we're looking at puts it pretty bluntly. It says, quote, "It's hard to argue that this isn't effectively just rebranded welfare." Now, to be clear, this isn't charity. It's just how the government is structured, but the economic reality is that a huge slice of their economy isn't from making or selling things, it's from direct financial support.
So you might be wondering, how does that even work politically? Well, Greenland is its own country, kinda. It's part of the Kingdom of Denmark. The best way to think about it is like Scotland's relationship with the United Kingdom. Greenland handles its own internal business, but when it comes to the big stuff like foreign policy and defense, that's all handled and paid for by Denmark.
Okay, so we've established it's a tiny, dependent economy, which brings us right back to our main question. Why are superpowers so interested? Well, this is where things get really fascinating. It's all about what's buried under all that ice.
I'm not kidding, Greenland is sitting on an absolute treasure chest. We're talking about a massive, pretty much untouched landmass that's loaded with rare earth metals, the stuff you need for all our modern tech, plus oil, natural gas, and even precious gems like diamonds and rubies. This is reason number one for all the attention, a mind-boggling amount of untapped resources.
But, and this is a huge but, there's a catch. Just because the treasure is there doesn't mean you can get to it. The climate is brutal, the distances are insane, and they just don't have the workforce. So actually getting all that stuff out of the ground, it's an enormous challenge. For now, that treasure chest is pretty much locked tight.
So the resources, that's the long game, the potential future wealth. But Greenland's value right now, you could argue it's even more important, and this has nothing to do with what's under the ground. It's all about where it is on the map.
It really boils down to two huge strategic advantages. First, the Arctic ice is melting. That's opening up brand new shipping routes that are way shorter and faster. And guess what? Greenland is prime real estate right on the edge of those new sea lanes. And second, it happens to be home to a super important U.S. military base.
And that base is the Thule Air Base. It's been there since the 1950s, originally set up as an early warning system to watch for Soviet missiles coming over the pole. Fast forward to today, it's run by the U.S. Space Force, and it's doing pretty much the same job. And here's the genius part for the U.S. Because Greenland is part of Denmark, a NATO ally, America gets this absolutely critical military outpost without any of the headaches of actually having to govern the place.
So you've got this wild mix of potential treasure and prime strategic real estate, and that combination has led to some pretty out there ideas that you've probably seen in the headlines. And that brings us to the big question of what's next for Greenland?
Right. The question that blew up a few years ago and put Greenland on everyone's radar. With all this strategic and economic value, why doesn't the U.S. just, buy it?
The simple answer? It's highly unlikely. I mean, it's just not how the world works anymore. Yeah, the US did buy Alaska from Russia, but that was back in the 1800s. The whole practice of one country buying another country's territory, people and all, has pretty much disappeared.
So what would have to happen for it to become, say, the 51st state? Well, it's a political maze. First, Greenland would have to become totally independent from Denmark, which would be a huge economic shock for them. Then, its 57,000 people would have to vote to join another foreign government. It's a very, very long shot.
So let's put this all together on our leaderboard. These scores really tell the whole story, that whole paradox. On one hand, you've got rock-bottom scores for size and industry, a 1 out of 10. Can't get much lower than that. It's tiny, and it doesn't have a diverse, self-sustaining industrial base. But on the other hand, look at GDP per capita, a surprisingly high 8 out of 10. But that's almost entirely propped up by that Danish support. It all averages out to a 4.4 out of 10, which is the perfect numerical summary of this small, dependent economy with a high income and some really deep structural challenges.
And this all leads us to the final, huge question. Greenland is at a crossroads, caught between its reliance on Denmark and the strategic ambitions of global superpowers. As the ice keeps melting, revealing both resources and new sea lanes, the biggest challenge for its 57,000 people will be navigating these powerful external forces to forge a future of their own.